It's the Two Under podcast. It's Australia's most popular independent podcast as of last week. We're very pleased about that. I'm Jack in Brisbane, and we're here today to preview the titanic clash against Spurs at St James's Park this coming weekend. I've got Dimi in Melbourne, who's recovering from Greek Orthodox Easter. How you doing, Dimi?
Very well, mate. I'm probably a couple of kilos heavier after the last few days of food. So, as you know, I just came from the gym now, so hopefully that helped a little bit. In a couple more days, I'll be back to square one. But yeah, been a big few days.
Good on you. That'll sort you out. And a big Tune Under podcast welcome back to Seb Stafford-Bloor of Tifo Football and The Athletic. But for the next 45 minutes, he's here in his capacity as a Spurs fan. Welcome back, Seb. How do you feel about the prospect of talking about Spurs for 45 minutes?
Not great, Jack. Not great, but we'll do it. We'll tough it out and just get through it. And you've already told me I'm allowed to swear on this podcast, so it could be exciting. Fun journey ahead.
Absolutely, go for it. We do plenty of that. Although actually not too much recently because Newcastle have been quite good. But we've always got VAR to swear about and complain about. So
yes, indeed.
Yeah,
yes,
maybe we'll touch on that as well. So let's get started, Seb. I'm really interested to talk to a Spurs fan because they, from the outside, have had, what can only really be described as a bit of a car crash of a season. But they're still sitting fifth in the league table and are only 3 points behind Newcastle, who, by all accounts, have had an amazing season, one of the best seasons that we've had in living memory. But I just want to flash up this tweet that you sent out on Saturday. I think this was immediately after the Bournemouth game. And you said, I have no idea what anybody thinks is being achieved with this. Every pressing Tottenham issue this season has been dithered over and then eventually fudged. The pitch is a circus, but it's even worse away from it. So I just want to take this in two parts. First of all, there's the on-pitch stuff, which I think anybody who's watched Spurs this season has it's been a hard watch. It's been very difficult to watch them. But then there's the overarching off the pitch stuff as well. Daniel Levy, everything that's gone on there, the managerial situation. So why don't you take the off pitch stuff first and just give us a bit of an overview about what's going on at Spurs, what's gone wrong with the managers over the last few years? What do you think the main sort of structural problems and issues at the club have been, which has led to this sort of on pitch underachievement this season?
Well, I suppose you have to really go back to 2019 to answer that, Jack. And I think if you take some of the decisions as a collective, so we'll get to the coaching ones and the issues around funding the first team, but you also incorporate aspects like the furlough decision made during the first lockdown, the Super League decision made in the dead of night, and some other less high-profile issues which have arisen from time to time. You have a very angry fan base who feel like the executive doesn't necessarily make decisions which reflect their beliefs or what they think best reflects their football club. Then I think with the footballing decision specifically, so within that context, you've got the decision to sack Mauricio Pochettino instead of funding the rebuild that he'd been calling for quite some time before he eventually left the club. Then made a series of lunges at coaches who theoretically and very much in big, bold, inverted commas could win now. And neither were very popular. Both are ex-Chelsea coaches. Both seem to arrive at the club with this attitude of being a little bit above, well, not even a little bit, very much above the club. We're doing you a favor by being here. We're going to tell you we're doing you a favor in, so many words at every opportunity. Everything that goes wrong on the pitch is somebody else's fault. Or is something which just cannot be corrected by a mere head coach. So whether that be a defense, a midfield, one of the consistent themes has been, obviously, if you look at the Premier League table at the moment, if you look at Tottenham's goals against column, that's not a very happy sight. And it actually compares quite badly to teams in the bottom half, let alone the top four. There it is, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thread that has connected Jose Mourinho and Antonio Conte, and I suppose to a lesser, briefer extent, Nuno Espirito Santo, was this idea that Tottenham's only way of operating was to become a counter-attacking team. Now, I kind of understand that against the Manchester City, caliber of opposition, or Manchester United, Chelsea, Arsenal, like these teams. That's kind of fine, right? But this has been across the board. So Spurs, I think one of the things that has antagonized Spurs fans over the years has been this idea that even when you go away to Southampton, you've got to sit behind the ball and wait for Southampton. Oh my goodness, Southampton are coming. Everybody back, and call it a sense of entitlement. Maybe we all believe that our teams are a little bit better and our clubs are a bit, more famous than they really are. That's a commonality amongst all supporters. But it's been very boring, and it's also been quite irritating to see what has obviously been a Tottenham weakness exposed voluntarily again and again. And I think within this, you've got other factors which are just bizarre. Like I can't say too much about Tottenham's managing director, Fabio Paratici, at the moment, because obviously he's got an appeal in against his global ban. But then you had this situation, which a couple of weeks ago, which I think kind of sums up some of the things I've raised, which was that the club's first instinct was, or the first public statement was to say, well, we've been blindsided by this. We don't know what to do, so we'll do nothing. And then a couple of days later, Paratici went on some kind of, not quite gardening leave, I don't think, but he stepped aside and his responsibilities were passed to Greta Steinson, who'd previously been his number two. And on the one hand, okay, they got there eventually, but if you think about sort of the genesis of that situation, which was the entire Juventus board resigning at the beginning of the World Cup, because the ban and the points deduction that all of these people suffered didn't actually arrive until January. But Spurs seem to have been operating with this assumption that probably be fine. And again, it's very difficult to tolerate that kind of inertia in the same sense that one of the problems with Conte. Now, Conte's first season was actually pretty good. Like he played some good football, and
fourth.
I personally think Tottenham got fourth last season because there's a lot of bad teams around them, and they played well. They had a good run, but that was not a strong top four beyond the teams that actually competed for the title. And they got there because Arsenal kind of frittered away fourth place. I mean, they had that terrible run, and you obviously beat them at St James's Park, and they threw it away really more than Tottenham won it. But Conte has always had this. So Conte's original contract was due to expire this summer, so the summer of 2023. He only signed, I think it was 18 months when he arrived, and his position is always, invariably when he's been asked about it in press conferences, it's always been to say, well, we'll just decide at the end of the season. And you can't run a football club like that. No, everyone knows this, right? Like, when a professional player, now I'm not saying it's a good thing, but this is what happens, knows that a manager might not be there in the next year, it changes the attitude, like it changes levels of commitment. So this situation has been hanging over the club for ages. The club haven't acted. They let it get to a ridiculous point with Conte's rant after the Southampton game before deciding they had to part on by mutual agreement. And then following that, which could have been a clean break and a little bit of fresh air, it could have been the moment where, you chuck open the windows, right? You let the fresh air in and cleanses everything and everyone feels a little bit happier. Instead of that, Conte leaves and all his staff remain. So you kind of have the worst of both worlds, which is you don't have Conte's personality, which, like him or loathe him, has a value, but you have his assistants who all believe, I guess, in the same thing. So Spurs are playing in exactly the same way, and they have many of the same flaws, but also loads of new ones, because there's nobody with proper top flight head coaching. Like Christian Salini, I'm sure is a very capable football coach, but shouldn't be managing at this level, clearly.
Not a manager.
Doesn't have a sort of 100% Dimi. And yet, here they are, with the greatest respect to your team and to Manchester United. I feel like two different cases, because obviously Man United are coming from a position of strength. I feel like Newcastle have had a really good season, but you've had bad moments during a season, at which point a better side than Tottenham could have pushed you well out of the top four. It hasn't happened, and you'll likely go on to clinch it, and deservedly so. But Spurs have had this advantage for a really long time, let it slide, done nothing, to the point where the situation becomes completely hopeless and irretrievable, which is where we are now. I know the table suggests otherwise, but anybody who's watched Tottenham knows that they're more like, I personally think they'll probably finish 7th or 8th rather than like 5th, or there's no chance to finish 4th. But yeah, so that's the short answer. But there's a lot of very, very, very unhappy people, and a lot of, this because you lived through the Mike Ashley years. You don't want inactivity, and you don't want you want the idea that like there's change somewhere in the future. There's you don't mind not winning now. You don't mind if like you never win, but you want to feel like you're on a journey towards something good. And for that, you require competence. And I personally have not even I've lost faith in this season quite obviously, but also I don't really believe that the club is equipped to make a good decision regarding management, coaching, players going forward either. Yeah. So it's very dispiriting.
You want to feel that everyone's aligned, don't you? And that was the main thing that came when we appointed Dan Ashworth, and we've got good people in place now. So the whole club feels like it's pulling in the same direction. And with Spurs looking from the outside, it just doesn't look like you've got that. Yep. And then that managerial search, when Nuno eventually got it, that was incredible, because every week there was someone new. There was Gattuso, and there was the Portuguese guy who'd been in Ukraine, and then there was other people. And then all of a sudden they appointed the guy who came from Wolves, who himself was quite a defensive sort of negative coach.
Who was out of work, who like to add a bit
of lost his job.
Jack, who'd lost his job. Like, so to add a bit of context to that, like that was preceded by Daniel Levy's sort of traditional end of season letter to the fans, in which he did this sort of mea culpa, where he talked about, we've kind of taken our eye off the ball, and maybe the stadium occupied too much organizational energy and focus. But don't worry, we're going to get back to like what we consider to be Tottenham DNA soon. And you go and point a counter-attacker. Like, it's not a question of like, Tottenham think they're above playing counter-attacking football. It's not true at all. It's just like, if you look at that squad and where its strengths are and where its weaknesses are, it's not a counter-attacking team really. Like, and also you're kind of, fans will tolerate a lot if it's fun, if it's enjoyable, if it's optimistic. If it's just kind of like, that scene in Gladiator, where I'm getting older, so my references are getting older with me, but where they're in the Colosseum and all these guys come in, and their only option is to kind of huddle in that sort of under the shields in that single column. That's Tottenham. That's Tottenham's footballing style. It's, please, please, please don't hurt us. And let's do everything that we can to kind of minimize the impact of Harry Kane, Son Heung-min. They're good counter-attacking players, Kulusevski, definitely, but I've also seen them play on the front foot, and they're pretty good at that too. So the whole thing makes no sense to me at all.
Do you think, going back to 2019 and that Champions League final, do you think that run papered over cracks, because it was a very emotional run in the end, because there was the win over Man City and then the Ajax semi-final. So it was like, but it wasn't like controlled in any way. It was complete chaos on the way to the final. And then Liverpool sort of outplayed Spurs in the final. But you'd said that Pochettino had already wanted, he was already asking for new players and a refresh. And then Levy decided not to do that. And then it became quite apparent early in the next season that things were not right there. So do you think that papered over big cracks, and that made Daniel Levy think he was going to do it his way, and he didn't have to listen to Pochettino, and he just wanted to do it how he thought it should be done?
Possibly. I don't know for certain, Jack. I did cover Tottenham a lot in person during that period, during the Pochettino era, a few years. And he'd spoken about this before, and he'd spoken about the need for what he called a painful rebuild. And there were definitely players at the club who he felt needed to leave and who didn't. But then also, if you look at the fabric of that Champions League season, ironically, it's comfortably the worst Pochettino season in terms of like the type of football played and the assembly of the side. So he loses Dembele, who is probably Tottenham's most important player. Wanyama gets a chronic injury, which kind of ends his European career. He has to go off to MLS, and he was out for forever. The centre-back pairing, the Vertonghen Alderweireld pairing, had kind of was aging. Kyle Walker had gone. He was replaced by Serge Aurier, who's a problem. He has some good attacking attributes. Not a hopeless player, but he's a problem. Just always will be. And so a lot of these players just were never replaced. And that team that got to the Champions League final, like there were periods during the season where Pochettino was playing Harry Winks and Moussa Sissoko as a midfield two. Like occasionally with Dele Alli dropped in as a third player, and none of those players can do all of those roles. Like Sissoko, I know you don't like him, and I get why, given his history with your club.
You're right there.
Sissoko,
no, we don't like him.
2018, 2019, Sissoko was Tottenham's Player of the Year. It was absolutely magnificent in a way that nobody could ever have imagined. He was this little footballing miracle. And I think things like that made, I don't know, just it made it very easy to believe that Tottenham were healthier than they actually were. And perhaps it did convince people that that team needed to be broken down and reassembled. Like so many bits of it were it was the last hurrah. Like, and actually, if you look at some of the games, like that Champions League run is a great example, because you don't see a lot of good performances. You see a lot of good moments. Even Ajax, right? The Spurs were terrible for an hour, absolutely terrible. And yet somehow, right, they get through. Manchester City was kind of the same. Like they played pretty well in the first half against City, but they were defensively dreadful. They probably, in a VAR-less era, would have lost because of the Raheem Sterling goal at the end. It was correctly ruled out, but Llorente's goal probably should have been ruled out too, because obviously I think it hits his hand. I think today's interpretation of that rule would be very different. So it was very easy to believe what you wanted to believe about Spurs and think, well, no, we're not that far away. We could do, if we got like a win now manager in, we don't need to go down the 200-400 million pound restoration project route. And I feel like that's what happened. And I think you guys have already seen this at Newcastle. New players are important for all sorts of reasons. So one of the things I've observed about your season is people saying it's not just the spending. And to an extent, they're right, because you need to be able to sign Bruno Guimaraes. You need to be able to sign Sven Botman. And the value of that is, in the first instance, because it plugs a hole in your team, it makes you better 1 to 11, right? But also it allows other players to get better or other players to pick up. So if Guimaraes doesn't arrive, Almiron's probably being sold. We're probably still talking about him in the way that Jack Grealish does, right? As it is, you've got a player that no longer has to exist in Steve Bruce land, where you're only like, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when I watched Newcastle pre-takeover, your only attacking option was give it to Sam Maximan, 60 yards from goal. And
correct.
The best goal of the time, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Dribble six play. It was like.
No,
it was like. Sorry, Seb. I was going to say it was like when, if you remember the 2010 World Cup, when Maradona coached Argentina, and they were playing Germany, I think, in the quarterfinals, and Maradona thinks, well, Messi, he's like me, and I dribbled all these players, and I can just carry the team. Messi, take the ball in halfway, and try and beat 8 German disciplined defenders, and see how you go.
100%.
And football doesn't work like that anymore.
Nope. And if you you can have that talented player. If you put a Guimaraes behind him, if you say to your defenders, we no longer need to defend in numbers because we've got this big Sven Botman monster there now, and we've got Fabian Schär playing really, really well, and our goalkeeper is excellent, and our fullbacks are actually, not Javier Manquillo anymore, and the other guy whose name I've forgotten. You've got, I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone, but you've got a much higher level of general competence. All of a sudden, you're saying to, I know Sir Maximan's kind of become a bit more peripheral, but you're saying to someone like that, your role is a bit more focused on your strengths now. And it helps people develop. Almiron's a great example of that. Almiron's become a far better player than he'd be appreciated he could be, because there's a better team around him. Spurs didn't think like that. It was We've got Kane, score 30 goals a season. Son will do the same thing. Like Dele Alli is going to be great forever. It will be easy to replace Christian Eriksen. It will be, don't worry. Like I know Kyle Walker's, the Kyle Walker thing is really interesting because you look at Walker and you see like, if you ignore like the sort of the texture of what Walker was, which was, yes, like a really rapid defender who had excellent recovery pace. He was better defender than people gave him credit for, but Walker was a problem for like a matchup problem for pretty much any left-sided player, whether it be a midfielder, fullback, whatever, because he was so good at carrying the ball. When he left, Spurs thought all they really had to do was find another quick attacking fullback rather than someone that had his exact attributes. And so every time that happens, you get a little bit worse. The players around him get a little bit worse too. Like Eriksen, when Eriksen left, nobody thought that like he was the only player in that midfield that could really pass to a very, very high standard. He hasn't been replaced to this day. Like there's no one. Bentancur, fine. Højbjerg, and Bentancur's a really good player, but obviously out forever now. Højbjerg passes in straight lines and sideways. Oliver Skipp's a good player, but still learning the game, etc., etc. You don't have anybody with any craft. And these are details which smart football people appreciate. So I've met Dan Ashworth, and I met him during his time with the FA, and I saw the sort of the fruits of his labor there, and a very smart person, and a very, very smart move from Newcastle to have him head the organization and not just let it become a kind of ownership, throw money a thon, which it can be in your sort of takeover situation. Spurs just don't get the sense that there's anybody that thinks about the game in that detail. Like, and there've been also this is heading in a sort of rant territory, but there've also been some absolutely catastrophic bits of transfer business. Tanguy and Ndombele being chief among those. Just I feel like I don't have anything more to say about him as a football player. Like I think really, really talented, but not great for that situation, I don't think. Giovanni Lo Celso, brittle, good player, not the world's best attitude, I don't think. Not hugely committed to making a success of himself in English football. Fine, fair enough. But like you got to find it's on the club to find these things out, and that's part of building your team. And Spurs just haven't done any of this stuff really to a high enough standard.
And the player I was thinking of actually that was going around my head when you were talking both about Newcastle's transfer business and Spurs' right back issue was Kieran Trippier, because he's he's probably going to be in the team of the season this season. His assist stats are amazing. His attitude and his application and his professionalism. Honestly, he's the best right back that Newcastle have had in the Premier League era, and he's only been here for just over a season. He's an absolute phenomenon the way he carries himself, and I've heard him talk about problems. I think he had problems with Pochettino towards the end, and he wanted to get out. But I was thinking Spurs could probably have done with him throughout this period, and still now probably, and they sold him 4 years ago now.
Yeah, that was a very weird moment. He had a very bad year at Spurs in his last year, and so by his own admittance, he was pretty poor. At the same time, I kind of agree with you. When he was at Spurs, you used to hear a lot of stories about like how good a person Kieran Trippier was away from the pitch. Like a lot of things about charity work and outreach and that kind of stuff. And you always need those characters. Like Michael Dawson was another. Michael Dawson was that guy, or Aurelio Gomez was very similar. Like when all clubs do this, like they do sort of community stuff. So you send a group of players to visit sick children or elderly people. And I think probably most fans will recognize that it's generally the same players in every photo, right? And Dawson was one of those. Gomez was one of those. Trippier in a kind of more unofficial way, like was doing a lot of stuff that I don't think a lot of people appreciated at the time. Good person, good pro, good player. Yeah, completely agree. Also, if you want to set a professional standard within your club, like in terms of things like accountability, a great guy, right? Because played for England, played for Diego Simeone, who, whatever else you say about him, demands a very, very high standard of application, right? So a great guy to have that. And also a great guy to have well into his 30s, even when he's no longer, he's probably about a year or two away from being a bit part rather than an every week starter, still valuable at that point. So yeah, it's just one of like a dozen terrible decisions Spurs have made. Like I'll hold my hands up. I didn't hate the decision at the time because I think Spurs got a very good fee for him, and also for as much as I know about the situation, there's the relationship between him and I don't know if it's Pochettino or other members of the coaching staff or the executives. I think that relationship had broken down, so it probably made sense. But it is still, to be fair, characteristic of myopic thinking. Yes.
All right, so I asked you before about why Spurs are still sitting in 5th here and they've scored 57 goals. That answer really is Harry Kane, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about that. He scored 20. He scored 20 odd goals in the league this season. He's on 206 Premier League goals, so he only needs 54 more to match Shearer's record. Is he going to stay at Spurs after this season? He's definitely going to stay in the Premier League, isn't he? He wouldn't want to go to Europe when he's that close to the record.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure how important the record is to him. I guess it is. He's a competitive guy. The situation is this: like he's got a year left in his contract, and he's a player approaching his 30s who has a history of bad ankle injuries. I can see the club digging their heels in and saying, we want to get one more year out of you, and if you leave, you leave. I can absolutely see that happening. Whether that's the right approach, I'm not sure. What I will say is what you'll hear between now and the end of the season is the argument, well, Spurs should cash in. And that's fine because you could probably get 100 million out of someone for him. I guess that's probably fair. I mean, on the basis of what Lewandowski went for in his mid-30s. But if that's to make sense, like you have to have faith in your club to reinvest the 100 million because you're not going to get another Kane, right? Because it's a generational player. He's England captain. He's broken the club's all-time goal scoring record. He has displaced Jimmy Greaves in the kind of list of immortals. That does not happen very often. And if you have a smart recruitment team, so say, for instance, you were Liverpool 4 years ago, right? So you have faith in their ability to, in Michael Edwards, who was the sporting director at the time, to identify the next generation of player or someone who would fill the gap at least a little bit, even by committee maybe. Fine, but Spurs don't have that. Spurs have, I don't know who they would attract. I don't know what's available in the market. So like if there was an obvious, if there was like a sort of for the sake of argument, if there was a red hot striker at Southampton who was a little bit raw, but he scored 10 goals this season and he played quite well and he was 21 years old and you think, 5 years of that's quite interesting. I don't see many of those players out there at the moment. So I don't know whether it makes sense. I mean, I don't know. I hate to admit this, but last year when Kane did his interview with Gary Neville and obviously stories have started appearing in the Sun, I was pretty annoyed about that because I felt it was handled badly. And also the club were offering Champions League football and, now I got sympathy. I just if you're Kane's age and you're at the stage of his career and you've given what you have to the club, I desperately wouldn't want to see him leave, but I could completely understand why he'd want to now. Because it's just, I can't see a situation in which he wins anything at Spurs between now and the end of his prime. I don't see even like a League Cup or an FA Cup. I don't know how I just think you can't build a 5-year rebuild around a 29-year-old player anymore. It just doesn't work. So I don't know what happens. I have no inside information at all about that, but who knows? I'm sure it would be a very, very boring topic throughout the summer.
Yeah, it would bore everyone to tears like it did a few years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Turning to the match then on Sunday, which is it's a massive match for Newcastle. This is, I think if we win this, we could put Spurs out of the. I know you're down on Spurs getting in the top 4, Seb, but looking at the points, we're not used to being in this position, so we're looking at everyone going, "Oh, we need them to lose. But
I get it.
This could knock Spurs out. I think. So they've got hard fixtures as well. But here are some of the previous fixtures over the last 10 years at St James's Park. Newcastle have only won 2 of these, and there's been 1 draw. And Spurs have actually got a good record. They've won 6. Dimi, you probably remember the game we had at home to Spurs very well last season because it was a bit of a special one, wasn't it?
It was such an exciting occasion, really. It was obviously unfortunate that we hadn't changed the manager as well, but that's okay. But it was the first game, obviously, post takeover. I remember watching it on TV. I was almost in tears as the game started because you could see what it meant to the fans and the people there that finally we've been released of Mike Ashley, more so than the fact that the Saudis have come in. It was more so that we've released from Mike Ashley. And I think that got lost in a lot of the post takeover talk. But to see the faithful with the war flags and everyone just up and about, and the fact we scored, I think in the first 2 minutes, I was absolutely buzzing. And yeah, I'm pretty sure woke up the missus as I usually do when we score, and that was good. And it was a good 15 minutes when we were up 1-0 up, and then typical to us under Steve Bruce, we just completely died in the arse after about 20 minutes, and we got done. But it was a great occasion, and it did feel like a new chapter. Although we did look a long way off in terms of being compared to Spurs, or where Spurs were top 4 challengers, and we seemed like an absolute mile away from that.
We were gassed after 5 minutes in that game.
Oh.
All of the energy came out. Everything just went into
fans
that.
too. I think the supporters were gassed as well because we're all hyped up for it. I'm pretty sure there was a 2-week break leading into that game as well. I think it was international break before. So there was 2 weeks of build up for this first game post takeover. And yeah, I think players, supporters, everyone was completely cooked after 10 minutes.
It feels like a lifetime ago, that one. Are there any other games, Seb, there that you're looking at that stand out or that you particularly remember? I think Kane scored about 10 goals in these games, which is why I'm a bit worried about him this weekend.
Yeah, there's a few of them. The 12-13 one, where I think Jermaine Defoe scored in that for Spurs.
That was the first game of the season, I think. I remember.
Yeah, it was Andre Spurs' first game. I remember that. And he played quite well. Like 2015-16, I remember, but I don't want to talk about still.
We'd just been relegated then. That was bizarre.
That was the Rafa game.
Yeah,
like I don't. Also, what kind of jumps out at me is like looking at 2021, which was the 2-2, which with Mourinho in charge, and the 2-3 game that we won, which was one of Nuno's last games, I think. Not his last game, but I think it might have been his penultimate one. I remember thinking that I remember feeling very disengaged by what I saw. Like the only joy I took from, in a kind of, forgive me, Schadenfreude sense, was obviously the Sky cameras on 21, 22 just kept lingering on Amanda Staveley and aren't you happy? And then we rained on the parade, and that felt like kind of fun in a sort of West Ham type way. But it's just also like, I think in both of those fixtures, I remember thinking, this is not part of a journey towards something. This is just existing in this kind of in the period before like someone inevitably leaves the club. Like at 2-2 under Mourinho, I think Spurs were already a hopeless case, even though he wouldn't leave the club for a while yet. Nuno, I think I knew then that Nuno wasn't. I think I knew when Nuno was appointed that he wasn't going to be quite right. So they're kind of waypoints on your journey rather than ours, really. Spurs just exist at the moment. So yeah, I want to say that 2013-14 involved Nasser Chadli scoring from about 30 yards. I think maybe Adebayor scoring in that game. Like I remember something like that, maybe, or maybe that was the 3-1. I can't remember, but it's sort of I like watching Spurs at St James's Park.
I can't remember that Joe Linton and Willock game. Or was that must have been in COVID? Because I just cannot remember that.
I've
got no recollection.
Willock scored right at the end. Spurs Willock scored right.
That was when he was on that crazy run of scoring every game.
Yeah, it was part of that. Yeah, but I think Jose had a terrible record at St James's Park. I don't think he got many wins. We always used to get good results against Chelsea when he used to come up to St James's, and he always every game or pre-game he'd talk about his love for Sir Bobby, and you sort of thought he was an inside man or double agent every time he played at St James's Park. He didn't want to upset Mr. Bobby Robson, like he used to call him.
Let's have a look at Spurs.
That he seemed to have for Bobby Robson. I felt like that was appropriate. I hope it was sincere. I'm sure it was. He owed an awful lot to him, so I'm sure it was. It's heartfelt. But yeah, that was a nice touch.
That's a great story because he was his translator, wasn't he, when he was at Barcelona?
Yeah.
And the translator became a Champions League winning coach. That's pretty amazing. Let's have a look at Spurs' Sorry, Seb. Let's have a look at Spurs' recent fixtures. The last 5 games. There was the win over Forest, but everybody beats Forest, so that doesn't really count. There was that funny game at Spurs, at Southampton, where Conte lost his mind. There was the Everton game where Michael Keane, of all people, scored the amazing equaliser. Then there was the Brighton VAR game, and then there was last weekend's horror show as far as Spurs are concerned. It's been a bit of a mixed bag, hasn't it, Seb?
No, it's been consistently bad. Like, so the one thing I'll say is, like, I feel it's really important to say this stuff out loud, because we all moan about refereeing decisions. The Tottenham-Brighton game was an absolute disgrace. I know Tottenham won. Absolute disgrace. It's one of the first times I've ever watched a game the Spurs have won and felt guilty about even extracting any sort of joy about it, because it was just so poorly officiated. I don't even know what to say about that. But no, I think all of these games reflect, all these games exhibited familiar themes. Like, the attacking was dreadful, defending was awful. That Forest game, I mean, what that doesn't show is that Forest missed a penalty in the last minute of injury time. The Bournemouth game was maybe the low point, but then there were parts of the Everton game where it was just, it's been consistently like this. There's been no, it's like an old car that's stuck in the same gear. It's the same every week. It doesn't get better or worse. It's just the same. And it's up to the other team to kind of exploit the weaknesses. And you can see 3 goals at home to Bournemouth. It's just, no disrespect to Bournemouth. I think that they've had a good season, and I hope they survive. I like Bournemouth. I like watching football at Dean Court too, but not good, clearly. And you don't. That's a kind of sequence of results which you're not entitled to play. Europa League football, let alone Champions League football, if you perform like that. To my mind.
Yeah, and I've actually watched a few of these because I've been interested in Spurs' results. And it's just been such a painful watch. It really has. Like, we'll get onto the way they've set up and the possible team, but it's just so bad. Like, and you were talking before about everything's relative for football fans. So some fans would say, well, Spurs are 5th. What's the problem? Stop complaining wherever we are in the league. But it's all relative. You can't be happy when your team is playing like that. It doesn't matter if it's successful or if it's not. And the problem is, if it's not, then you've got big problems, because everyone's going to be unhappy with it then. Yeah,
100%. Like, it's the payoff. Like, you can... I remember the Harry Redknapp team. So that had its flaws, right? And goodness knows it did. And it had defensive weaknesses. But it had balls as well, right? It had courage, and it would play expressive football, and it would go out swinging. Whereas this team is like, you can't compensate yourself with anything. So, like that Southampton game, you can't even have a kind of, well, we scored 3 goals. Like, well, but I won't remember any of them. Like, who cares really? The Everton game, in a normal circumstance, like a point away to a newly Sean Dyche Everton at Goodison Park, which is, it's a tricky old place, Goodison Park, and it always has been, just because that crowd is quite raucous, and they always take about 2 or 3 minutes to turn on the referee if things aren't going well, and like we all do. But the construction of the stadium makes it it's difficult, and it's a great venue, but horrible to play there, I guess. And so, a good result, right? But awful performance, just absolutely terrible. No attacking merit, no level of footballing intelligence, no accountability. Just awful. And the only goal, you think, oh, we scored, but it was like a penalty, right? Which was the only sort of attacking moment. So painful to watch is right. I've just been bored. I think it's partly because I started accepting what the season would be around World Cup time, I think, and so I kind of tuned out and sort of turned my guns, so to speak, on on some of the executive problems. That's kind of been the kind of focus of my irritation. But yeah, not fun, right? Just, no.
Let's have a look at our fixtures, Dimi, our run of form. So we'd actually been in really good form. We'd won 5 on the bounce before.
You were great at West Ham. Absolutely great at West Ham.
Yeah, the West Ham was a good one. And Brentford was a fantastic comeback as well. There's 2 come from behind wins in those games there as well, and we had a really comfortable win over Manchester United, which was brilliant. But we were humbled on Saturday at Villa Park. They absolutely taught us a bit of a lesson, and it was a little bit of a shock, I think. So, do you think, Dimi, we've been in good form, and that was a big shock? Do you think that's going to impact confidence and belief ahead of this massive game against Spurs?
I don't think so. I think I've got the utmost confidence in Eddie Howe and his team. I think perspective is always very important, and sometimes it lacks in football and in football fandom. That was only the 4th game we've lost in the entire Premier League season, and we were routinely losing 15 to 18 to 20 games a season and just scraping survival. So context is very important. Obviously, every team has a bad day. Even Manchester City have a bad day. Arsenal have had bad days recently. So it happens. And Villa are in great form themselves, played great, deserve the win, you move on. I think that the one real positive thing that I can see, or positive out of the poor result, is we're coming up against Spurs, who obviously are challenging, despite what Seb thinks, challenging for some sort of higher honours or top 4 finish. So there is no time for us to wallow and lament the result. It sort of sharpens the focus straight away. Maybe if we had a home game against, no disrespect, but against a Southampton, or an away game against a Wolverhampton, someone who's lower on the table, maybe the focus wouldn't be as sharpened. But home game, Sky Sports, Spurs, everything's on this game. So I think it definitely helps us that we've got a big game following that poor result.
It feels a lot like the Man United game did before that. Same kind of time, same kind of profile of game. How much of Newcastle have you seen, Seb, over the last few weeks? You mentioned the West Ham game there.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of it. I've been impressed. I've been mainly I was kind of impressed by the recovery from the January period, that kind of succession of draws and disappointing results. I feel like, I don't know if this is accurate, but I feel like, particularly at St James's Park, there's a little bit of a. Do you remember what Anfield was like during the sort of peak of the Jurgen Klopp years? Feels a little bit like that, in the sense of there's an inevitability about Newcastle there. I don't have such a problem with the Aston Villa game, just because I think Villa are playing really, really well, and that stuff just happens. But the thing that's really stood out to me is the newly acquired ability to win games when you're not playing well. Like, you weren't particularly good against Brentford, I didn't think. You rode your luck, but then this is part of the game. You've got to do that, and you cannot play 100% every game. You cannot have every player playing 8, 9 out of 10 every game, and you just got to get by. And that's a feature of every team, like, in that position that qualifies for the top 4. It's just the way of it. And I would say the Forest game is another example of that, like, sort of some good fortune in there, but it was earned. I felt like I thought that Newcastle were the more proactive of the 2 teams, and yes, the decision came really, really late, but so what? Won the game. So I've been impressed. I've also, in a broader sense, I didn't think that you'd be here yet. I thought you'd be a year away from where you are, because I think a couple of things that surprised me. I think Botman has been a lot better than I thought he was going to be. I feel like I didn't really see Callum Wilson's resurgence. I think mainly because I really like him as a player. His injury record always makes me nervous, and I've always thought that you could never really count on him across the course of a season. But he's been great. I felt like, even though he's been injured, Isaac has been super important for you over the past couple of weeks, which I like Isaac. I think I saw him more as when he was at Sociedad. He used to play quite a lot from the left-hand side. Wide, not wide attacking forward, but like that area. And I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work with Sam Maximan, but it's worked out really well. Bruno's turned out to be far more durable than I thought he would be, just because it's very traditional coming to the Premier League from French football, obviously. And so it's gone a lot better. And then factored in, I don't think anybody saw Almiron playing as well as he has done. So credit to Eddie Howe. He's done a terrific job. What I will say, I don't mean to rain on anybody's parade, but a lot of things have aligned too. So this is a season where Liverpool have been absolutely dreadful. Chelsea, just a nonsense. Like, you know, Chelsea close to the relegation zone to the top 4. Spurs have been dreadful. Like, but the benefit of all this stuff is you've kind of crammed it into this window, which is so important, especially when you're making that first step. I know that the heavy investment is coming and that like you'll have advantages that you didn't very, very soon. But at the moment, you're still you're a little underpowered. You're competing with Man United, who spend gazillions every single year. You know, you're having to go and get points at Arsenal. You're going to have to. I know you won't believe me, and I'm sure you're in your situation. I'll do the same, but you have nothing to fear on Sunday at all. You'll win 3 or 4-0. But
don't say that.
Yeah, but you kind of your form has to survive without like the benefit of, like in Spurs' case, having a guy like Harry Kane. He just scores goals. Doesn't matter. Like he's like a contextless goal scorer. It doesn't matter how crap everything is around him. He just scores 30 goals a season every single year. And it's kind of it's an amazing luxury to have, and you don't have that. So, you know, he's done a great job, Eddie Howe. And yeah, I didn't think it was in him. You know, I think we've discussed this before, but like I have some thoughts about the Newcastle project, but I don't think this is the kind of time to express them. And you know, but within those and sort of beyond some of those issues, I think, you know, there are some people doing a very fine job, and Howe's one of those, and some players playing extremely well. And, you know, that's a separate issue, I think, even if it is contained within the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did talk about that last time you were on as well.
Yeah.
It's always, you always have to keep that in mind, but at the same time, we're going to enjoy this while it lasts, because it's been good, and the football on the pitch has been absolutely outstanding, really. And you were talking there about the West Ham game, but Newcastle not playing well, but winning still. After 20 minutes of that game, we were winning 2-0, but we hadn't been playing very well. And Eddie Howe was absolutely rollicking the players on the touchline. He lost it in a way that he wouldn't
Tyndall
usually
was going
do.
for it as well.
Tyndall, obviously, yeah, but that's a bit more common.
The attack dog, yeah,
the mad dog. But that kind of shows, like, and Eddie talks about standards, and you know, we're not here to be friends with people. We're here to compete, and that's just music to our ears. We love that, you know, especially coming after ticking along Steve Bruce. So it's it really is fantastic at the moment, and the improvement he's got in some of the players as well. We'll have a look at your predicted team, Dimi, for the Spurs game. I was interested that you've still gone with Burn at left back, and I was pleased about that as well, because there's a lot of talk about Target coming in, and you've also brought Longstaff back in and Miggy from the team that played Villa. What's your thoughts behind those sort of changes you've made?
Yeah, so the Burn one is more thinking how Eddie would think. I don't see him chucking out one of the back 4 after one really, really poor performance. Obviously, Burn has his flaws. He's 6'7", not the fastest player in the world, and playing out of position, but he's been pretty much a solid 7.5, sometimes 8 out of 10 all season. So after you have one bad game, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and drop somebody. So I think he deserves at least another start. If he's poor again, then we can talk. And I think the other important change is Longstaff. I don't think I'd ever think I'd say this, but Longstaff coming back into the midfield. I think Bruno is really hobbling, I reckon. I don't think he's at his 100% best at his fitness. So he needs someone else in that midfield to sort of cover for him and do that dirty work running in that number 6 role. And I think Longstaff can do that. And if Longstaff is in there, it gives Bruno a bit more license. And obviously you've got the interchanging with Joelinton and Willock in midfield, which is also handy. But I think Miggy obviously is the other one who's going to come back in. I feel he's come back earlier than expected. And I think Murphy's done a job. He's done really well for his level and his talent. But I think it's time to bring back the leading scorer and someone who's been fantastic for us and hasn't let us down. So I think he's an obvious change if he's fit. And as you said, with Bruno being injured, I think Longstaff really helps that midfield 3.
Miggy scored a great goal in the away game against Spurs as well, so that might be playing on his mind a little bit. And Longstaff, we really missed Longstaff in the Villa game. He's been much maligned, but I think people are coming around to the idea now that you need players like that in your team. You know, if you're going to have
legs.
You're going to have the attacking talent, you're going to have people who are going to do the dirty work, and he's done that really well. Needs to work on his finishing, but if he does that, he'll be a real asset. Having a little look then at the Spurs, I don't really want to do this because it's quite depressing, really, isn't it? Looking at this Spurs team, the way they line up, it's just like, oh, you look at it and you just cringe, don't you? Do you think this is the team that played against Bournemouth? But do you think this will be the same team, Seb?
Yeah, pending a few issues. So Clement Longley subbed off with an injury during that game in the first half. So yeah, it's difficult to know what would happen if you can't play, because obviously Davinson Sanchez came on at the time, which was a bad decision because Sanchez is terribly fragile and got abused by his own fans, which is never acceptable under any circumstances. You never do that. I'm sure that there's plenty of people that would sort of chant the kind of, I pay my money, I'll say what I want, but I don't really agree with that. I think these are people. I wouldn't put him back in for a game like this just because I don't think it's really fair. But then at the same time, I'd imagine it would have to be Romero switching over to the left and probably Japhet Tanganga playing on the right of that back three. Even though Stellini is, we're told, not Antonio Conte, he doesn't seem to even contemplate a shape change. The big problem, I think, is that double pivot, because I think Skip and Højbjerg are good players, but I don't think they work together. It's just not. You have kind of 2 6s, really. I know that Skip might develop into an 8 at some point, but he's not yet that kind of player. Porro is fragile. Porro had to delete some of his social media accounts this week because of abuse he's getting from fans. Perisic has been a wonderful player for a long, long time, but he's been dreadful. Sparing like some good set piece deliveries he's just not worked at all. Kane, Son Heung-min, Kulusevski is pretty decent 3, obviously, when everybody's on form. But Kulusevski has not been the same player since he came back from injury. Son has had a very weird season, and Kane is Kane. Kane is still like the only caveat I would say is you can beat yourself in this game. Like if you're inhibited and you play well below the standard, if you play like you did against Villa, you might get beaten. And because I think also Kane gives you that sort of boxer's chance, right? But he carries a punch and he can always hurt you. Son as well. Son can turn up. But it's interesting. I was listening to Dimi talk about Dan Burn. He has to play because Spurs are so fragile from set pieces. Like one of Spurs' attacking strengths, even when they're playing badly, is set piece delivery. And one of their weaknesses, as you've seen, like look at the game against Brighton, look at some of the set pieces they defended against Bournemouth. Lloris is very flappy. He's very tied to his line. And also, there's just not the organisation within that defensive trio to deal with good set piece delivery. Burn's a problem. We know this. Trippier's a problem with his delivery has always been good. I think there's a huge chance Joelinton is a problem. Big chance for Newcastle from those. And that so even if forgetting everything else, that's why Dan Burn has to play. I would say there's nothing there that I think Porro becomes a good player one day, but he's still learning. He's only been here for a few months. Skip will become a good player. I have opinions about Romero. Good footballer. I feel like he's an example of what happens since he came back from the World Cup, it feels like there's some of those Argentinian players have forgotten kind of why they won the World Cup. Namely, like their goalkeeper played extremely well at important moments, and they had Leo Messi playing at an extraordinarily high level. And Romero is now a World Cup winner, but some of his performances since have just been a disgrace. Like in terms of kind of decision making and like not attitude, but just maturity. Like it's been a bit troubling for such a good player because he is at his very, very best. He's excellent, but I haven't seen his very, very best for a very long time.
He feels a bit like a walking red card when I see him as well. He looks like he's not far away from getting sent off. Yeah,
like also, I remember the Man City game when he smashed Erling Haaland in the first half, and people said, "Oh, like I know you eventually got sent off, but like Haaland was rubbish as a result." Like a player like Erling Haaland doesn't react to that kind of thing. The same way that like you could smash Shearer back in the day, didn't matter. Like he may not score, he may not have a good game, but it's not because of a physical threat. Look at Erling Haaland looks like he looks like an extra from a Terminator film. Like it doesn't get physically intimidating by Christian Romero.
Erling Haaland's he's a cheat code, isn't
He's
he?
a cheat. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's talk. Like, if you want to physically impose a player or impose yourself on a player, fantastic. But don't put your own side at a disadvantage as a result by picking up cheap yellow cards in the first 10 minutes. And there's just too much of that in his game. Maybe it dissipates in time, but so far not.
So this game tactically, the game at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Spurs really gave it a good go for about 10, 15 minutes, and the transitions were happening, and we were lucky to not concede. But then after that, we just controlled it from probably about minute 15 onwards. It was one of the best performances, and it was a real statement victory for us that game. So do you think tactically here, Seb, Spurs will just sit back, try and soak up the pressure, Newcastle will press and try and force them into mistakes, and Spurs will be relying on Son or Kane doing something special?
Yep. Pretty much, yeah. Because there isn't another idea. I'm not being facetious, it's just that is the only plan. And it's the kind of hope is that somehow Kulusevski, Son and Kane create a miracle that I don't know, like it wouldn't surprise me if Spurs concede within the first couple of minutes. Yeah, I feel like deep down it's that kind of game. I think it's a 3-up by half-time situation because you'll get an early goal, the crowd gets on top. Like what happens with some of these Spurs players is they remember we've got an interim head coach. It's not our fault. Like, you know, and some of them are already thinking about where they might be playing next season, or if, you know, who the new head coach is going to be. And also, like, I don't feel like, I know the table suggests they're in a race for the top 4. They're not. Like, it just looks that way. As soon as everybody's played their games in hand, and I think, I really believe Spurs will finish 7th or 8th. I watched I watched Liverpool last night, and I thought they were great. I thought they played really, really well. And also Spurs have got to go to Anfield. They've got to play Man United, play Newcastle. It's tricky old games. Then they've got Brentford at home. They're not going to win many more games, I wouldn't have thought. So I think a lot of players have really sort of consigned themselves to the fact that the season's sort of dead.
I've become obsessed with looking at the league table because it's nice for us to be looking out for Spurs and Man United's results instead of Burnley and Watford's results. So I did this, which is I developed the possible points totals, and you can see Spurs have got a possible total of 74, Newcastle have got 80. But the interesting thing was the games against each other. Spurs have got to come to Newcastle, they've got to play Man United, they've got to go to Liverpool, and they've got to go to Villa. So that's a pretty tough run in. And I don't know whether I feel better or worse with what you're saying here, because you watch Spurs and you know, so I should feel better about it. But because we're not used to being in this position, and it's a weird feeling to go into games confident against other big clubs, you know. But you're convinced, Seb, that Spurs are not in the top 4 race here.
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely. I'm not convinced Newcastle are going to finish the top 4 yet, but only because I think that you need to look out for Villa. I don't think Villa are going to be long term at that level. At the moment, they're playing so hot that you just got to be wary and respectful of that. So you got to keep winning. Spurs are not going to be in this conversation. They will lose. They'll lose to Newcastle. They'll lose to Man United. They'll get beaten at Anfield, and they'll lose to Villa, and they'll pick up a few extra points. I think they've got Leeds and, you know, a few others there. I think they've you know, but it's not. The season just needs to finish for them, and I think everybody's in that kind of mindset now. But Villa are not. That fan base fully believes that there's something that's going to happen at the end of the season. Don't rule out Liverpool. I know they've been dreadful.
I've been saying that,
but when Liverpool get hot, they're a problem, and you gotta get over the line now. I would see Spurs more as a kind of like a roadblock for you rather than a kind of direct rival at the moment, because they can still be awkward. Like if you give them a chance, Kane can still hurt you. I think that's fine. That's fair. But direct rivalry, it's kind of, it reminds me a little bit of how I felt about Man City back in the day. We had about 18 months of rivalry with Man City before they disappeared into the kind of, you know, where you're headed essentially, which is the kind of the investment patterns which Spurs will. It's not about whether they can match them; they just won't. So that's it's just a different type of club, a different kind of business model, I guess, and it reminds me of that. So it's kind of, it is what it is. But yeah, sorry, I don't have anything more interesting to say than Spurs are shit. Don't worry about it.
No, that's absolutely fine by me. That's absolutely fine. So let's hope that what you're saying comes true. You're going to go.
Yeah.
You're saying it's going to be a 3 or 4-0. I've got a similar feeling to this, like I said, as I had before the Man U game. I thought we were going to win that. We did. We won quite comfortably, 2-0 in the end, although we didn't score till the second half in that game. Dimi, what's your prediction? I think we're going to win. I think we're going to win 2-0. Dimi, what's your prediction?
Yeah, so I was going to say 2-0, but now that Seb sort of talked about how rubbish their defense is and they might just lay over and let us tickle them, I'll go 3-0, and hopefully it's all in the first half and we can have a cruising second half. But I think it's definitely a game where Spurs are on the ropes, and if you put them away early, or if we get 1 or 2 goals up in the first half, they'll just give up. So hopefully we do that, and it can be a nice Sunday evening here in Australia, and we can enjoy the victory.
The Monday morning glow.
Exactly.
Seb, just while we've got you as well, just before we finish, very quickly, I just want to ask you about Moussa Diaby, who's at Leverkusen. He's still being linked heavily with Newcastle. I know that you know all about German football. You live in Germany. What's he seems to be like an elite level. If we signed him, it would be kind of like a Bruno Botman style signing. Do you think he's a level above Newcastle? Even if we get in the Champions League, do you think he'll go back to PSG? No. Do you think it's going to happen? What do you think on that one?
No, I think also. No, he's not a level above Newcastle now. Good player, could be an excellent player. Isn't quite there yet. I think there are better options. He hasn't had a particularly good season. Leverkusen have had a difficult time. Like they've had managerial change, and like Florian Wirtz has been out for a very long time. He's now back, but so much of what they do well goes through Wirtz that it's hard to judge those players without him. I don't know. Like I think for the fees quoted, I think you can probably do a little bit better personally. I don't think like Diaby's going to be a guy that ends up regularly appearing in a kind of quarterfinal or semi-final of the Champions League, rather than a guy that consistently wins those kind of trophies. And he's probably a top 4 player rather than a league winning player. Like I don't think for instance, I don't think he'd be interested in playing. I don't think Bayern Munich would be interested in Moussa Diaby. Like I think if you had Serge Gnabry and Leroy Sané, I don't think you would add Moussa Diaby to that list, just because I think there's no need. But if you were Dortmund, you might. So that's kind of I don't know what that means to you, but that's kind of how I look at it at the moment. He may surprise me, but he's a really good player. He's just not outstanding.
All right, that's interesting. It's good to get that kind of insight. I think we'll leave you to it, and you can go and do your real paid job now. Thanks very much for your time, Seb. That's been so insightful. It's always good to get insights from the opposition supporters, because you see things and people who are in it understand it more. And we have it a lot where people say Newcastle fans think this, they think that, and it's not true a lot of the time. So to get that level of depth of insight is really fantastic. So thanks for your time, Seb.
Always my pleasure, guys. Always my pleasure. Enjoy the rest of the NRL season as well.
Oh yeah, we'll be enjoying that, and you still need to come over for the next Origin as well.
Yeah, well, you know what? Like I've kind of found myself. You're in Brisbane, Jack. I've kind of found myself rallying behind the Redcliffe Dolphins, just because they're new, and like it feels like I don't know, like it's fun. Right? It's not. I don't have an NRL team. I just like the sport, but yeah, it's been kind of fun to watch them knock over a few people this season. That's been cool.
It's been really good.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, thanks, Seb and Dimi. Thank you very much for your time.
Cheers, mate.
And we will be back. We'll be back with a review of this game on, I think it'll be Monday night, so it'll be Monday afternoon UK time. Cheers. See ya.
Okay, guys. I'm